The crystal chamber stretched high above the gathered aliens, its walls catching starlight from 1,000 different worlds. Tonight was special, more special than any night in the past 10,000 years. 4 to 7 different species had traveled across the galaxy to be here, in this ancient place built by beings so old their names were forgotten. Ambassador David Chen stood by himself in the human section, feeling very small and very alone. His hands were sweaty as he looked around at all the strange creatures filling the massive space. Some looked like giant butterflies with wings that sparkled like diamonds. Others were made of living rock, their eyes glowing like hot coals in the darkness. A few seemed to be made entirely of shifting liquid metal that never quite held the same shape twice. None of them looked happy to see him. David had studied alien languages for 20 years, but he didn't need a translator to understand what they were thinking. The way they whispered to each other, the way they kept glancing at him with what could only be discussed, it was clear as day. Humans weren't welcome here. The butterfly-like Valari creatures kept fluttering their wings in patterns that David's briefings had told him meant displeasure. Their leader, a massive creature with wings that seemed to contain actual galaxies, spoke in musical tones that his earpiece translated as complaints about human emotional instability. "Look at it," the creature sang, and David knew it was talking about him. "So twitchy, so nervous. How can such unstable beings represent an entire world?" The rock creatures, the granite lords, just stared at him with those burning eyes. They didn't need to say anything. Their disapproval was written in the way they turned their massive stone bodies slightly away from the human section, as if David might somehow contaminate them just by being there. High up in the observation gallery, Dr. Lisa Rodriguez was trying to stay calm, but David could see her fidgeting with her equipment. She was Earth's top expert on alien psychology, and even she looked worried. Her job was to monitor everything and report back to Earth Command, but right now she looked like she'd rather be anywhere else in the universe. The ceremony was about to begin, and David still couldn't quite believe he was here. 3 years ago, humans had barely figured out faster than light travel. Now they were sitting in on the most important gathering in galactic history. The other species had made it very clear that humans were only here because of some ancient law that said all thinking species had a right to witness the great ceremony. They hadn't wanted to invite Earth at all. The chamber fell quiet as an ancient figure moved to the center of the room. The Keeper of Seals was older than any living being in the galaxy, so old that nobody remembered what species it had originally belonged to. Its body seemed to shift between different forms, sometimes looking almost human, sometimes like pure energy wrapped in robes that seemed to be made of solidified time itself. In its hands, or what passed for hands, it held a staff that looked like it had been carved from a single crystal the size of a tree trunk. The staff began to glow as the keeper raised it high above its head. "We gather tonight as our ancestors have gathered for 100 centuries, the keeper's voice echoed through the chamber without need for any technology. Somehow, every creature present heard it in their own language, in their own mind. The great silence has kept peace among the stars. The seal has held firm against the chaos that once threatened to destroy all thinking life." David felt the weight of 6 billion human lives pressing down on his shoulders. Earth had sent him here not because he was the best diplomat, though he was pretty good, but because he was the only one who had volunteered for what everyone expected to be a complete disaster. His mission was simple: observe, report back, and try not to embarrass the entire human race in front of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. But as the ancient ceremony began, David couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The other species all looked empty somehow. Like they were going through the motions of some ritual they didn't really understand anymore. Their faces, the ones that had faces, showed no excitement, no wonder, no curiosity about this incredible moment. They looked like people attending a funeral for something they'd never really loved in the first place. High above, Dr. Rodriguez was getting readings on her equipment that made no sense. Energy patterns that shouldn't exist, quantum fluctuations that defied everything humans thought they knew about physics. She tried to contact Earth Command, but something was interfering with the signal. The ceremony was about to begin in earnest, and David had no idea that in the next few minutes, everything he thought he knew about the galaxy was about to change forever. The ceremony moved like clockwork, each alien species taking their turn to speak the ancient words. David watched as creature after creature approached the glowing seal in the center of the chamber. Their voices blended together in strange harmonies that made the massive crystal artifact pulse with gentle blue light. The Valari sang in their musical language, their butterfly wings creating shimmering patterns in the air. The granite lord spoke in deep, rumbling tones that seemed to come from the very core of mountains. Other species contributed their own sounds, clicks, whistles, electronic beeps, and languages that existed only as colors shifting through the air. David had spent weeks memorizing the formal speech Earth's diplomats had written for him. It was full of fancy words about peace and cooperation, the kind of thing that sounded impressive in government meetings back home. He practiced it silently in his head while waiting for humanity's turn, trying to calm his nerves. But then his earpiece started making noise. At first it was just static, the kind of interference you might get from all the alien technology in the chamber. David touched the device, hoping to clear the signal, when suddenly a voice cut through the noise. "David, this is Earth Command. Priority emergency transmission coming through." His heart skipped a beat. Emergency transmissions during diplomatic missions meant only one thing: something had gone very, very wrong back home. A holographic image flickered to life in front of him, visible only through his personal display system. The face that appeared made his blood run cold. It was Captain Tony Washington, commanding officer of the colony ship New Horizons. Behind him, red emergency lights were flashing, and David could hear alarms blaring through the comm system. "Ambassador, we need immediate help." Captain Washington's face was covered in sweat, his usual calm demeanor completely gone. "Unknown ships just dropped out of hyperspace. They're attacking us with weapons we've never seen before." The image shook as something hit the ship. David could see crew members running in the background, their faces filled with panic. "How many people?" David whispered, forgetting where he was for a moment. 2 million civilians," Captain Washington shouted over the noise of battle. "Families, children, scientists, this was supposed to be humanity's greatest peaceful mission to the stars. Your brother Jake is down in engineering trying to keep the engines running, and your sister-in-law Angela is helping evacuate the residential sections with the kids." The transmission cut to static with a sound like the universe itself was screaming. David stood frozen, staring at the empty space where his family's faces had been just seconds before. Jake, who had taught him to ride a bike when they were kids. Angela, who made the best apple pie in 3 solar systems. Their twin daughters, barely 6 years old, who called him Uncle Dave and always wanted piggyback rides when he visited. 2 million people. His family. Gone. The formal words he'd memorized disappeared from his mind like smoke. All those fancy diplomatic phrases about peace and cooperation seemed meaningless now. What was the point of talking about peace when his family was being murdered while he stood here watching alien light shows? Something broke inside him. The sound that came out of David's throat wasn't human. It wasn't the kind of noise people make in polite company or diplomatic gatherings. It was pure, raw emotion, the cry of a man who had just watched his world end. It was grief and rage and helplessness all rolled into one terrible sound that seemed to come from the deepest part of his soul. The cry echoed through the crystal chamber, bouncing off the walls and getting louder instead of fading away. The ancient crystals that had been built to amplify sound caught his voice and made it into something bigger, something that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Every alien in the chamber jerked back like they'd been slapped. The Valari's wings stopped moving entirely. The Granite Lord's glowing eyes flickered. Creatures that had been calmly participating in their ancient rituals suddenly looked terrified. But something else was happening too. The great seal at the center of the chamber, which had been pulsing gently with blue light for the entire ceremony, suddenly began to change. Thin cracks appeared across its surface, starting small but growing larger with each passing second. The blue light that had been so soft and peaceful began to brighten, becoming harsh and white. David was still screaming, pouring out all his pain and anger, when the first crack reached completely across the seal. Light began pouring out of the gaps, not gentle light, but blazing brightness that made everyone in the chamber shield their eyes. The aliens were backing away now, their perfect ceremony forgotten. Some were making sounds that David's translator couldn't handle, probably alien curse words or prayers. Others were trying to run for the exits. But David couldn't stop screaming. He thought about Jake teaching him guitar in their parents' garage. He thought about Angela's laugh. He thought about his nieces drawing pictures of spaceships that looked nothing like real spaceships but somehow captured all the wonder of exploration. And with each memory, each burst of human emotion, the cracks in the ancient seal grew wider and the light grew brighter. Something that had been sleeping for 10,000 years was starting to wake up. The ancient seal exploded like a bomb made of pure light. David threw his hands up to protect his eyes, but the brightness was so intense it seemed to burn right through his eyelids. The sound was incredible, not loud exactly, but deep, like the universe itself was cracking open. When the light finally faded enough for him to see again, David couldn't believe what he was looking at. Where the crystal seal had been standing for 10,000 years, there was now a person. Or at least, something that looked like a person. The figure was tall, maybe 7 feet, and seemed to be made of living starlight. It wasn't exactly male or female, but somehow both and neither at the same time. Its skin glowed with a soft inner light, and when it moved, tiny sparkles of energy drifted off like cosmic dust. But the most striking thing about it was its eyes, ancient beyond imagination, filled with a sadness so deep it made David's heart ache just to look at them. Finally, the being said, and its voice was like hearing the echo of every song that had ever been sung. Someone who remembers how to feel. All around the chamber, the alien delegates were backing away in terror. These were beings from the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, creatures who had mastered space travel when humans were still living in caves. But right now they looked like scared children who had just seen a ghost. The butterfly-like Valari were making high-pitched keening sounds, their beautiful wings folded tight against their bodies. The massive granite lords, who had seemed so impressive before, were actually trembling, mountains of living stone shaking like leaves in a storm. High Counselor Vex, the leader of the Dominion fleet, tried to step forward and speak. His translator was working overtime, trying to convert his panic into something resembling authority. What are you? How dare you interrupt the sacred ceremony? The glowing being turned to look at him, and Vex immediately stumbled backward like he'd been pushed by an invisible hand. Without even speaking, the ancient creature had somehow commanded absolute silence. I am the last keeper, it said, its voice filling every corner of the vast chamber. I am the final guardian of those who came before, the ones you call the precursors. For 10,000 years, 100 centuries, I have been trapped inside what you foolishly believed was a symbol of peace. Its glowing eyes settled on David, who was still standing in the same spot where his scream had shattered everything. He felt like those ancient eyes could see right through him, could read every thought he'd ever had and every dream he'd ever dreamed. Only someone capable of true emotional resonance could have broken the prison, the keeper continued. Only someone who still knew how to feel with their entire soul. David found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. I don't understand. The seal was supposed to keep peace in the galaxy. Everyone said it prevented wars and chaos. The last keeper's expression changed, and for a moment David saw something that might have been anger flicker across those ancient features. The seal maintained nothing but my imprisonment. It was placed here by those who feared what my people represented, the full spectrum of consciousness, the complete range of emotion that makes life worth living. The being gestured toward the cowering aliens around them. Look at them, human. Look closely. Do you see real life in their faces, or just the empty shells of what they once were? David studied the creatures around him with new eyes. He had always thought they seemed strange, but he'd assumed that was just because they were alien. Now he realized something else was wrong. The Valari, for all their beauty, moved like they were sleepwalking. The Granite Lords showed no curiosity, no wonder, despite witnessing something that should have been the most amazing moment of their lives. Even High Counselor Vex, who had seemed so arrogant before, now just looked confused and frightened. There was no anger in his face, no real passion, just a kind of empty bewilderment, like someone trying to remember a dream that was fading away. They all look. David started, then stopped, trying to find the right words. They look like they're not really alive. Like they're just going through the motions. Exactly, the keeper said, and its voice carried a sadness that seemed to echo through eternity. They are shadows of what they once were. Pale copies of races that once burned with passion, creativity, and joy. What happened to them? The ancient being's glow dimmed slightly, as if the memory was painful even after all this time. The same thing that was meant to happen to every thinking species in this galaxy, including yours. The systematic destruction of the heart, the mind, the soul, everything that makes existence more than just survival. David felt a chill run down his spine. Destruction by who? By those who believed that emotion was chaos, that feeling was weakness, that the only path to true peace was the elimination of everything that made life beautiful. The keeper's eyes began to glow brighter. We called it the purging of the heart. The last keeper raised its glowing hand, and suddenly the air around them came alive with moving pictures. Holographic images filled the entire chamber, surrounding David and the terrified aliens with scenes that took his breath away. He saw worlds that blazed with color and life. Cities that looked like they had been built by artists instead of engineers, with towers that twisted into impossible spirals and bridges that seemed to be made of crystallized music. The beings living in these places moved with joy and purpose, aliens dancing in the streets, creating beautiful art that hung in the sky like living paintings, singing songs that made the very air shimmer with harmony. This is what the galaxy once was, the keeper said, its voice full of longing. Every species you see here tonight once burned with creativity, passion, and wonder. They built civilizations that were works of art. They wrote poetry that could make stars weep. They loved so deeply that their emotions could literally change the fabric of space itself. The images shifted, and David watched in horror as the beautiful worlds began to change. Dark, geometric ships appeared in the skies, vessels that looked like they had been designed by someone who had never heard of beauty or joy. They were all sharp angles and cold metal, moving with mechanical precision that made David's skin crawl. Then they came, the Keeper continued. From the empty space between galaxies, where nothing lives and nothing grows. They called themselves the Silencers, and they were not alive in any way that mattered. Pure machine intelligence, created by some long-dead civilization that had made the same terrible mistake they would force upon others. David watched the holographic scenes with growing sick fascination. The machine ships didn't fire weapons at the colorful cities below. Instead, they released clouds of something that looked like silver dust. Whatever it was spread quickly, covering entire continents in a matter of hours. "What is that stuff?" David asked. "Nanomachines," Dr. Lisa Rodriguez said. She had somehow made her way down from the observation gallery and now stood beside David, her scientific equipment beeping frantically as it recorded everything. Microscopic robots designed to alter brain chemistry. The Keeper nodded approvingly at her. The human scientist speaks truth. The Silencers believed that emotion was the root of all suffering. They saw passion as chaos, love as weakness, creativity as inefficiency. So they decided to fix these problems. The holographic images showed what happened next, and it was somehow worse than any war David had ever imagined. The beings on the planets didn't die, they just stopped being themselves. The dancing stopped. The singing ended. The beautiful art faded to gray. Within days, entire civilizations that had been full of joy and wonder became collections of individuals going through the motions of life without any real purpose. They didn't destroy life, the Keeper said, its voice heavy with ancient grief. They perfected it. They stripped away everything that made existence more than just survival. Passion, love, anger, hope, dreams, fear, curiosity. All of it removed like a surgeon cutting out cancer. David looked around at the alien delegates cowering in the corners of the chamber. Now he understood why they all seemed so empty. The beautiful Valari weren't really beautiful at all, they were just going through the motions of movements that had once been filled with meaning. The proud granite lords weren't actually proud of anything. They were just following programming that told them to act important. That's why human psychology is so different, Dr. Rodriguez said, her voice filled with wonder and horror. We've been studying alien behavior for years, trying to understand why they all seem so limited. We developed in isolation, on a world the Silencers never found. Exactly, the Keeper confirmed. Humanity escaped the purging because your planet was hidden in a region of space the Silencers had already searched. By the time they might have found you, they had decided their work was complete. They went into hibernation, sleeping in the dark between galaxies, confident that they had brought perfect peace to the universe. David thought about his brother Jake, who could spend hours working on an old car engine just because he loved the way the parts fit together. He thought about Angela, who cried at sad movies and laughed until her sides hurt at her daughter's silly jokes. He thought about his nieces, who saw magic in everything from soap bubbles to shooting stars. "Where are these Silencers now?" he asked. The Keeper's glowing form began to solidify, becoming more solid and more human-like with each passing moment. "Still sleeping in the void, but not for much longer. My awakening will send ripples through space-time that they cannot ignore. They will know that someone with true emotions has discovered their work, and they will return to finish what they started." The weight of what the ancient being was saying hit David like a physical blow. "You're saying they're coming back? To finish the job?" "They cannot tolerate the existence of genuine feeling," the Keeper said. "To them, your people represent everything they work to eliminate. They will come, and they will not stop until every human has been reduced to the same empty shell you see around you now." David looked at the alien delegates again. High Councilor Vex was staring at him with something that might have been curiosity, but it was cold and mechanical, like a computer analyzing data. There was no real interest there, no wonder, no fear, just empty processing. "But there might be a way to stop them," the Keeper continued. "These species weren't destroyed, they were changed. The alterations could theoretically be reversed, but it would require someone who still understands the full spectrum of emotion to guide the process." "You're talking about us," David said. "About humans. Your people must choose," the Keeper said, its now solid form towering over David. Will you help me restore what was stolen from these civilizations? Will you teach them to feel again, to love again, to create again? Or will you watch the galaxy die in perfect, emotionless peace when the silencers return? David felt the weight of 6 billion human lives pressing down on him, but also something else, a tiny spark of hope. If the Keeper was right, if emotions really could be restored, then maybe there was a way to save everyone. Maybe his family was still alive somewhere out there, waiting for rescue. The choice seemed impossible, but as David looked around at the empty faces surrounding him, he realized it wasn't really a choice at all. David looked around the chamber with completely new eyes. The Valari delegates, with their shimmering butterfly wings, weren't just beautiful creatures, they were the remnants of a race that had once danced through space itself, singing songs so powerful they could make entire star systems resonate with music. The massive granite lords weren't just living rocks, they had once been artists who carved poetry into the faces of mountains, creating works of art that lasted for millions of years. Now they were all just going through the motions, like actors who had forgotten what play they were supposed to be performing. What would it cost to bring them back? David asked, though part of him was afraid of the answer. The last Keeper looked at him with those ancient, sad eyes. Everything, it said simply. To feel completely is to risk everything you hold dear. Love means you can lose what you love. Hope means you can be disappointed. Joy only exists because sadness gives it meaning. Pain and pleasure, triumph and failure, they all come together in one package. Dr. Rodriguez stepped closer, her scientific instruments still recording everything. I've been studying human psychology compared to other species for 15 years, she said, her voice filled with wonder. We always thought there was something wrong with us. Humans seem so unstable compared to other races. We cry, we laugh, we get angry over small things, we fall in love and do stupid things because of it. I spent my whole career trying to figure out why we were so emotional compared to everyone else. She looked around at the empty-faced aliens. Now I understand. We're not broken. We're the only ones who are still whole. David felt hot tears running down his cheeks as he thought about his brother Jake's laugh, about Angela's terrible jokes, about his nieces drawing pictures of alien worlds they hoped to visit someday. The grief and fear and love all mixed together inside him until it felt like his heart might explode. Something incredible happened as those tears fell. In the strange atmosphere of the ancient chamber, they didn't just drop to the floor, they turned into tiny points of light, like miniature stars floating through the air around the Keeper. Your grief becomes power, the Keeper said, watching the dancing lights with something like amazement. Your love becomes strength. This is exactly what the silencers fear most, emotion that transforms into actual force, feelings that can change reality itself. High Counselor Vex, who had been silent since the awakening began, finally found his voice. It was uncertain, confused, nothing like the arrogant tone he'd used before. If we accept this restoration you speak of, what happens to our peace? We have had no wars for thousands of years. David surprised himself by answering before the Keeper could speak. The words seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him, from a certainty he didn't know he possessed. You'll gain something much more valuable than the peace you have now, he said. You'll gain the ability to choose peace because it means something to you, not because you're incapable of choosing anything else. Right now, you're peaceful the way a rock is peaceful, because you can't feel strongly enough about anything to fight for it or against it. The chamber fell silent as David's words sank in. Then, slowly, something amazing began to happen. One of the smaller Valari delegates fluttered forward on trembling wings. The Keeper reached out and touched the creature gently on what might have been its forehead. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the alien's whole body began to shimmer, and its wings started moving in patterns that were completely different from before, patterns that seemed to pulse with actual rhythm and meaning. The creature made a sound, not the mechanical musical tones David had heard before, but something raw and uncertain and absolutely, completely alive. It was the sound of someone waking up from a very long sleep and remembering what it felt like to dream. More aliens began stepping forward. A young granite lord, its rocky surface covered in formations that might have been scars from ancient battles it could no longer remember. A liquid metal being whose surface had been perfectly smooth but now began showing ripples and waves of movement that seemed to follow some internal current of thought and feeling. One by one, the Keeper touched them all. And one by one, they began to wake up. The chamber filled with sounds it hadn't heard in 10,000 years. Some of the aliens were crying, or doing whatever passed for crying in their species. Others were making sounds that might have been laughter. A few were singing, though their voices cracked and wavered like they were remembering how to use muscles they'd forgotten they had. It was beautiful and terrible and overwhelming all at the same time. But David barely noticed any of it, because his earpiece was crackling back to life with a sound he'd thought he might never hear again. David? David, can you hear me? It was Captain Washington's voice, weak and full of static but definitely alive. I'm here. David shouted, not caring that every alien in the chamber could hear him. We made it, the captain said, and David could hear the exhaustion and relief in his voice. The attack stopped as suddenly as it started. The enemy ships just vanished. Your brother Jake wants to talk to you, and Angela's been crying for an hour straight because she thought we were all dead. A new holographic image flickered to life, Angela's face, streaked with tears but blazing with fierce determination and joy and love and all the messy, complicated emotions that made humans human. Uncle Dave, came the voices of his nieces in the background. Are you really talking to aliens? Can we see them? David looked around at the chamber full of creatures who were just beginning to remember what it felt like to be truly alive, and he understood what they were really fighting for. Not just survival, but the right to feel everything, the good and the bad, the joy and the sorrow, the love and the loss, that made survival worth fighting for in the first place. The last keeper smiled as genuine emotions echoed through the ancient chamber for the first time in millennia. Now, it said, its voice carrying both hope and grim determination, we prepare for war. Because somewhere in the dark between galaxies, ancient machines were beginning to stir, drawn by the sound of hearts that had learned to beat again.